I'm standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning in late September, the Colorado sun streaming through the windows. Thomas installed himself 37 years ago. In my hands is a photograph. My husband, Thomas Jenkins, grinning in front of this very house when it was nothing but a wooden frame and big dreams. Thomas was a carpenter, not just any carpenter, but the kind of man who could look at a pile of lumber and see a home. He built this house with his own 2 hands over the course of 2 years, working weekends and evenings after his regular jobs. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, hardwood floors he laid board by board, crown molding he carved in our garage. "This house will stand for 100 years, Evie," he'd said, wiping sawdust from his face. "And when I'm gone, it'll take care of you." He'd been gone 5 years now. Heart attack at 62, quick and cruel, the way he'd always feared. "Don't want to be a burden," he'd say, but his absence was the burden. This house, empty except for me, echoed with memories that both comforted and haunted. Thomas left everything to me, as spouses do. The house, the small savings, the truck he'd babied for 20 years. But he'd always told our son Brian, "This will be yours someday, boy. Take care of your mother, and this house will take care of your family." I never added Brian's name to the deed. Some instinct always stopped me. Thomas had said someday, not today. And honestly, I think part of me was terrified of being completely alone. If Brian owned half the house, would he still visit? Would I become just another obligation? Selfish? Maybe. But at 63, widowed and watching my friends move into senior communities one by one, this house was all I had left of the man I'd loved for 40 years. I set down Thomas's photo and picked up my coffee, trying to shake off the melancholy that had become my constant companion. That's when I heard Brian's car pull into the driveway. My son looked nervous when I opened the door. Brian had always been handsome. He got Thomas's strong jaw and my dark eyes. But at 35, he'd developed worry lines that seemed too deep for his age. His wife Melissa stood beside him, perfectly put together as always, in a cream blouse and designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Mom," Brian said, kissing my cheek, "we need to talk to you about something." My stomach tightened. Those words never preceded good news. We sat at the kitchen table, the oak one Thomas had built for our 10th anniversary. Melissa's perfectly manicured nails drummed lightly on the surface while Brian cleared his throat 3 times before speaking. "So, Melissa and I have been talking," he began, "about our future. We want to buy a house. Start really building equity, you know?" I nodded, smiling. "That's wonderful, honey. You've been renting that apartment for what, 3 years now?" 4, Melissa corrected, her voice pleasant but firm. "And the rent just keeps going up. We're basically throwing away money every month." "The thing is," Brian continued, "saving for a down payment while paying rent is really hard. We've crunched the numbers, and if we could just save what we're paying in rent for maybe a year or 2, you want to move in here," I finished for him. Relief flooded Brian's face. "Just temporarily. We'd save up, find the perfect place, and then we'd be out of your hair. What do you think?" What did I think? I thought about dinners that wouldn't be eaten alone. I thought about voices filling the empty bedrooms. I thought about not waking up at 3 a.m. terrified that I'd die in this house, and no one would find me for days. "Of course," I said, probably too quickly. "This house is way too big for just me anyway. It would be nice to have the company." Melissa leaned forward and I caught a whiff of her expensive perfume. "Evelyn, you're amazing. Seriously. And don't worry, we won't be in your way at all. This is still your home. We're just guests." She smiled and I smiled back, missing the first red flag entirely. "Besides," Melissa added, almost as an afterthought, "when this becomes ours eventually, we'll already know every corner of it." The words hung in the air. When this becomes ours eventually. Not if, not maybe someday. When. Brian shot her a look I couldn't quite read. She touched his hand, and something passed between them, an understanding, a plan I wasn't privy to. "Mom's not going anywhere for a long time," Brian said, but his voice sounded hollow. I laughed it off. "Well, I certainly hope not. I'm too young to be put out to pasture. But later, after they'd left with promises to start moving in next weekend, I sat in Thomas's old recliner and replayed Melissa's words in my head. When this becomes ours. Had I given them that impression? Had Thomas? I pulled out the deed from my filing cabinet. Property deed, house built 1988, sole owner, Evelyn Marie Jenkins. My name, only my name. I should have said something then, should have clarified. But I told myself I was being paranoid, reading too much into a casual comment. I put the deed back and told myself everything would be fine. The first 6 months were actually wonderful. Brian and Melissa moved into the largest guest room, the one with the walk-in closet and attached bathroom. They brought minimal furniture, claiming they wanted to save money, not fill up storage. Melissa was, I had to admit, delightful those first few months. She'd cook dinner twice a week, always asking what I felt like eating. She laughed at my stories about Thomas, asked questions about his carpentry work, even requested I teach her his famous pot roast recipe. I want to carry on family traditions, she'd said, carefully chopping onions the way I showed her. When Brian and I have kids someday, I want them to taste Grandpa Thomas's cooking. It warmed my heart. We had game nights, Scrabble, Monopoly, cards. Melissa was competitive but fun about it. Brian seemed happier than I'd seen him in years, more relaxed. He'd come home from his accounting firm and actually smile, something he rarely did when living in that cramped apartment. On Sunday mornings, Melissa and I would drink coffee on the back porch while Brian slept in. She'd tell me about her work in marketing, about the difficult clients and office politics. I'd share stories from my 30 years as an administrative assistant at Colorado Springs Medical Center before I retired. "You're so easy to talk to, Evelyn," she said once. "My own mom is, well, she's not great with advice." I felt needed, wanted, useful, but small things started to shift. In month 3, Melissa replaced my kitchen curtains, yellow gingham that Thomas and I had picked out at a craft fair in 1995. They were looking pretty dated, she explained, hanging up sleek gray blinds instead. "These are more modern. Don't you think they brighten up the space?" The room looked dimmer to me, but I said they were fine. In month 4, she rearranged my living room furniture. "Better flow," she said. "Trust me. I did a semester of interior design in college." Thomas's recliner, the one he'd sat in every evening for 20 years, got moved to the basement. "It clashes with the aesthetic," Melissa said. When I mentioned it to Brian, he gave me a weak smile. "Mom, you know how particular you are about things. Maybe it's good to update a little? Dad wouldn't want you living in a time capsule." Particular. Was I being particular? In month 5, Melissa started hosting her book club at the house. 8 women who'd arrive at 7 p.m. and stay until nearly midnight. I'd retreat to my bedroom, listening to their laughter through the walls, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I never said I minded. After all, I'd told them this was their home too, hadn't I? Month 6 brought a new development. Melissa's friends started calling our house Brian and Melissa's place. I overheard it when her coworker dropped something off. "Wow, your house is gorgeous," the woman said. "Thanks," Melissa replied. "We're still settling in, but it's got such good bones. Not Evelyn's house, not Brian's mother's house, just your house." I told myself I was being sensitive, reading into things. But at night, alone in my bedroom, the master bedroom that Melissa had already commented was so spacious must be hard to maintain for one person. I stared at the ceiling and wondered when exactly I'd started feeling like a guest in the house Thomas built. Month 7 arrived with autumn colors and a distinct chill, not from the weather, but from the atmosphere in my own home. Melissa had started inviting people over without asking. Not just her book club anymore, but friends for dinner, co-workers for drinks, her parents for weekend visits. I'd come home from the grocery store to find strangers in my living room, drinking wine from my glasses, sitting on my furniture. "Oh, Evelyn," Melissa would say brightly. "You remember I mentioned Jessica was coming over, right?" I didn't remember because she hadn't mentioned it. "These are my parents, Patricia and Donald," she introduced one Saturday, as if I should have known they were coming from California for the weekend. Patricia looked me up and down with barely concealed assessment. Melissa's told us so much about this beautiful home. Not your beautiful home, just this beautiful home. I started spending more time in my bedroom. It seemed easier than navigating the social minefield of my own first floor. I'd hear Melissa giving house tours, pointing out features Thomas had designed. See this crown molding, hand-carved, and these built-in bookshelves, original to the house. She talked about it like she owned it, like she was showing off her own property. One evening, I came downstairs to get water and overheard Melissa talking to her mother in the kitchen. I stopped in the hallway, not meaning to eavesdrop, but Patricia's voice carried. "So when does the house actually transfer to you and Brian?" My heart stopped. "Well," Melissa said, and I could hear her opening the refrigerator. "Technically it's still in Evelyn's name, but Brian says it'll be ours when she, passes. And that could be years, sweetheart. She looks healthy." "I know," Melissa sighed. "But we're basically living rent-free in a $1 million house. I did the research. Properties in this neighborhood are selling for $950,000 to $0.2 million, depending on condition. Once we get it, we could renovate the whole place, really modernize it." "Melissa, that sounds like you're waiting for the woman to die." A pause. Then, "Don't be dramatic, Mom. I'm just being practical. Brian's an only child. Obviously, this house will go to him eventually. We're just getting a head start on planning." I stood frozen in my hallway, my hand pressed against the wall Thomas had textured himself. They thought the house would be theirs. They were planning renovations. They were researching property values. And Brian, my son, apparently believed this too. I backed away silently, returned to my room, and locked the door. My hands were shaking as I sat on the edge of my bed. Had I led them to believe this? Had I somehow promised something I didn't remember promising? I replayed every conversation. I'd said make yourselves at home. I'd said stay as long as you need. I'd never said this will be yours. But Thomas had. Thomas had always told Brian, "This house will be yours someday, son." Someday, after I was gone. Were they waiting for me to die? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my small desk, the secretary desk that had been my grandmother's, and opened my filing cabinet. There it was, the deed, house built 1988 by Thomas Jenkins, title transferred to Evelyn Marie Jenkins upon his death in 2020, mortgage paid off in 2009, property value estimated at $975,000 as of last year's assessment. My house, legally, completely, solely mine, but morally? I pulled out my wedding album, flipped to a photo of Thomas holding infant Brian, both of them grinning at the camera, Thomas's carpenter hands cradling his newborn son with such tenderness. "This house will take care of your family," Thomas had said. Did that mean I should give it to Brian? Was I being selfish by holding on to it? I thought about my sister Helen in Phoenix, who'd sold her house and moved into a condo after her husband died. "Best decision I ever made," she told me. "No yard work, no maintenance, built-in community." Maybe Melissa was right. Maybe I didn't need 4 bedrooms. Maybe I'd be happier in a smaller space. But then I remembered Thomas hammering in the last nail of the roof, remembered teaching Brian to ride a bike in the driveway, remembered every Christmas morning and birthday party and Sunday dinner. This wasn't just a house. It was my life, my memories, my security. I opened my laptop and started researching. Can adult children claim parents' property? Do verbal promises about inheritance count legally? Rights of homeowners versus occupants in Colorado. The law was clear. The house was mine. I could ask them to leave any time. But they were my family. Brian was my only child. And Melissa was carrying herself with the confidence of someone who believed this was already hers. By sunrise, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't confront them yet. I'd observe. I'd see if my suspicions were paranoia or truth. And I'd document everything, just in case. 2 weeks later, Melissa cornered me in the kitchen while Brian was at work. She'd made tea, my favorite chamomile, and set out cookies on a plate. The effort was so thoughtful it made me suspicious. "Evelyn, can we talk?" she asked, her voice gentle and concerned. "Just us girls?" I sat down, cradling the warm mug. "Of course, dear." Melissa sat across from me, reaching over to pat my hand. "I've been thinking a lot about you lately, about how hard it must be, maintaining this big house all by yourself." "I manage fine," I said carefully. "I know you do. You're so capable. But the yard work, the repairs, the utilities. Thomas built this house for a family, and now it's just you rattling around in all this space. Don't you ever feel lonely?" The question hit closer than I wanted to admit. "Sometimes," I conceded. "I thought so." Melissa leaned forward, her expression radiating sympathy. "Brian and I were talking, and we think you should consider looking at some senior living communities. Not nursing homes," she added quickly, seeing my face. "Those active adult communities like Sunset Meadows. Have you heard of it?" I had. It was expensive and depressing, full of people waiting to die. "I'm only 63, Melissa." "I know, and you're young for your age. That's exactly why places like Sunset Meadows would be perfect. They have activities, classes, trips. You'd be around people your own age, make friends. No maintenance to worry about, no lawn care, no property taxes eating up your budget." She pulled out her phone and showed me a glossy website. "Look at this. They have a book club, a fitness center, even a pool, and everything's on one floor. No stairs to worry about as you get older." As I got older, as if I were already decrepit. "You'd have so much freedom," Melissa continued. "No responsibilities. You could travel, take up hobbies. Don't you want to enjoy your retirement?" I looked at her perfectly made-up face, her earnest eyes, and saw the calculation beneath. "I'll think about it," I said. Relief flooded her features. "Really? Oh, Evelyn, I think you'd be so much happier. And Brian and I could handle selling this place. I mean, helping you sell it, so you wouldn't have to deal with the stress." I said I'd think about it, Melissa, that's all. Her smile tightened slightly. "Of course. Take all the time you need." But her tone suggested my time was limited. That evening, Brian brought it up over dinner. "Mom, Melissa mentioned she talked to you about Sunset Meadows. What do you think?" I looked at my son, my baby boy who I'd raised alone after Thomas's heart attack. He looked hopeful, eager even. "You think I should move?" I asked. "I think it might be nice for you. You know, a fresh start. Less upkeep. You've been in this house since before I was born. Don't you want something easier?" "Easier for whom, Brian?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, is this about what's easier for me or what's more convenient for you and Melissa?" His face flushed. "Mom, that's not fair. We're just thinking about your well-being." "Are you?" Silence stretched between us. Finally, Brian pushed back from the table. "Talk to Melissa if you don't believe me. This was her idea because she cares about you." He left the room. I sat alone at Thomas's table and felt the foundation of my world cracking. The next morning, I called Robert Morrison. Robert had been Thomas's best friend and lawyer. After Thomas died, he'd handled the estate, such as it was, and had checked in on me regularly those first few years. "Evelyn," he said warmly when his secretary put me through. "How are you? It's been too long." "I need legal advice, Robert. Can I come see you?" His tone shifted immediately to professional concern. "Of course, can you come this afternoon?" His office hadn't changed since I'd last been there. Still the same leather chairs, the same law books lining the walls, the same photo of Robert and Thomas fishing on his desk. I told him everything. Melissa's suggestions, the overheard conversation about property values, Brian's weak support of his wife's plans, the feeling of being slowly pushed out of my own home. Robert listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Evelyn, you know I have to ask. Do you want to give them this house?" "No," I said, surprised by my own certainty. "No, I don't." "Then legally you're on solid ground. The property is solely in your name. Thomas left everything to you with no stipulations about Brian inheriting. You have every right to maintain ownership and occupancy. But is it right, Robert? Morally right? Brian is my only child. Where else would the house go eventually? That's your decision to make, not theirs to take. Robert pulled out a legal pad. Here's what concerns me. They're establishing residency, creating an expectation, and possibly, though I'd need more evidence, attempting to manipulate you into relinquishing property through emotional coercion. That sounds so criminal. It's not criminal unless they're literally defrauding you. But it is, at minimum, ethically questionable. He tapped his pen on the desk. My advice? Document everything. Every conversation, every suggestion, every interaction. Colorado is a one-party consent state, which means you can record conversations you're part of without telling anyone else. You want me to spy on my own family? I want you to protect yourself, Evelyn. Because if this goes south, if they do try to claim you're incompetent or pressure you into signing anything, you'll need evidence that you were of sound mind and that any decisions you made were truly your own. The thought made me sick, but I couldn't deny the logic. What do I do in the meantime? Play along to an extent. Don't confront them yet. See if they escalate or back off. And for God's sake, don't sign anything without calling me first. I left his office with a small digital recorder he insisted I take, along with a sick feeling in my stomach. That night, I activated the recorder before dinner. It felt wrong, hiding this tiny device in my cardigan pocket while my son and daughter-in-law chatted about their day. But Robert's words echoed. Protect yourself. Evelyn, Melissa said as I served pot roast, Thomas's recipe, the one I taught her. Have you thought any more about Sunset Meadows? I made an appointment for us to tour it this Saturday if you're interested. You made an appointment without asking me? Well, I figured it wouldn't hurt to just look. No pressure. I felt the recorder's weight in my pocket. I suppose it wouldn't hurt to look. Melissa's face lit up. Perfect. And you know, even if you don't love Sunset Meadows, there are other options. The key is finding something that suits your needs while you're still young enough to enjoy it. While I'm still young enough, I repeated slowly. Exactly. You don't want to wait until you're too old to make these kinds of decisions, right? Better to do it now while you can really explore your options. Brian nodded along. Makes sense, Mom. After dinner, while I washed dishes, I heard Melissa on the phone in the living room. I turned off the water and listened, my recorder still running. Jessica, I think we're making progress. No, she's being reasonable about it. I know. But Brian says once she sees these places, she'll realize how much easier her life could be. We're thinking maybe 6 months? A year at most? The house is in such good shape, we wouldn't need to do much before selling. Well, eventually it'll be ours anyway, so we're just accelerating the timeline. My hands gripped the edge of the sink. Eventually it'll be ours anyway. I dried my hands carefully, went upstairs to my room, and locked the door. I downloaded the audio file to my laptop, backed it up to the cloud, and started a folder labeled Documentation. Robert was right. I needed to protect myself, because clearly my son and daughter-in-law had plans for my house. And I was starting to realize I was just an obstacle in their way. October arrived cold and early that year. The aspen trees in my backyard blazed gold, just like they had every autumn since Thomas planted them the year Brian was born. I'd been documenting everything for 3 weeks now, recording conversations, photographing text messages, keeping detailed notes of every interaction with timestamps. Robert Morrison reviewed my files weekly. You're doing good work, Evelyn, he'd said at our last meeting. But be prepared. This might get uglier before it gets better. I didn't know how right he was. It was a Thursday evening when Melissa called me into the dining room with unusual formality. She'd set the table with my good china, the Wedgwood set that had been my mother's, and lit candles in the crystal holders Thomas had given me for our 20th anniversary. What's the occasion? I asked, noting Brian's nervous energy as he pulled out a chair for me. We wanted to do something special, Melissa said, her smile bright but her eyes unreadable. Sit down, Evelyn, please. The recorder was in my cardigan pocket. I'd started wearing it everywhere, a constant weight against my ribs. We ate small talk, the weather, Brian's upcoming project at work, Melissa's promotion to senior marketing manager. The conversation felt rehearsed, like actors hitting their marks before the main performance. Finally, over dessert, apple pie I hadn't made, Melissa reached across the table and took Brian's hand. "Evelyn, we have some news," she said. "Something that changes everything." My heart rate picked up. I gripped my fork. "We're pregnant." The words hung in the air like smoke. Brian was grinning, genuinely happy, and for a moment I forgot everything else. "Pregnant? Really?" My voice cracked. "I'm going to be a grandmother?" "You are," Brian said, and his eyes were wet. "We found out 2 days ago. We wanted to wait until we were sure before telling you." Melissa pulled a piece of paper from her purse. A medical lab report. Patient, Melissa Ann Jenkins. Test, quantitative HCG. Result, positive. Estimated gestational age, 6 weeks. It was real. She was actually pregnant. All my suspicions suddenly felt petty and cruel. This was my grandchild, my son's baby, Thomas's legacy continuing. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "This is wonderful, truly wonderful." Melissa stood and came around the table to hug me. "We're so happy you're happy. And Evelyn, this is actually part of why we wanted to talk to you." She sat back down, and I noticed her hand moving to her stomach in that protective gesture I remembered from pregnant friends. "A baby changes everything," she continued. "We need more space, a nursery, a playroom eventually. And honestly, stairs are dangerous with infants. This house is perfect for a growing family. That's why Thomas built it, right? For his family." I felt the shift in the room's temperature. "We've been thinking." Brian took over, his voice gentle but practiced. "About what we discussed before. About you moving somewhere more manageable. We thought maybe this news might help you see that it makes sense. For everyone." "You want me to move out because you're having a baby?" "Not just that," Melissa said quickly. "It's about what's best for you, too. Think about it. A baby crying at night, toys everywhere, the chaos of young children. You're at a stage in your life where you deserve peace and quiet. We'd be disrupting that." "You'd be disrupting my peace by raising my grandchild in my house?" The question came out sharper than I intended. Brian flinched. "Mom, don't twist it like that. We're trying to think practically. You don't need 4 bedrooms. We do. This house is big enough for a family. You could get a beautiful condo with the money from—" He stopped abruptly. "From what, Brian?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Melissa jumped in. "From selling the house to us. At a fair price, of course. We've actually already looked into it. Properties in this neighborhood are going for around $900,000. We'd offer you that, maybe even $925,000. That's above market value. You could buy a luxury condo and have money left over for travel, for whatever you want." The room spun slightly. They'd priced my house. They'd calculated their offer. They'd planned this entire conversation around the pregnancy announcement. "You've already decided what my house is worth," I said. "We wanted to make sure we could afford a fair price," Brian said. "We've talked to a mortgage broker. We're pre-approved for up to $950,000. Mom, we can do this. We can make everyone happy." I looked at my son, my beautiful boy who I'd raised to be honest, to be kind. When had he become someone who calculated the value of his mother's home while announcing his wife's pregnancy? "I need to think about this," I said, standing up. My legs felt unsteady. "Of course," Melissa said smoothly. "Take all the time you need. We're not trying to rush you. We just wanted to put it out there, now that there's a baby to consider." The baby, my grandchild, the leverage they were using to take my home. I excused myself and went to my room. Behind the locked door, I sat on my bed and replayed the recorder. Their voices, tinny but clear, laying out their plan like a business transaction. Then I called Robert Morrison. "They're pregnant," I said when he answered. "And they want me to sell them the house." There was a long pause. "Evelyn, I need to tell you something. I had a PI do some preliminary research on Melissa after our last conversation. Just background stuff, nothing invasive. But I think you should come to my office tomorrow. There's something you need to see." Robert's office felt different in daylight, less friendly, more clinical. He had a manila folder on his desk that he pushed toward me. "I almost didn't show you this," he said, "but you have a right to know what you're dealing with." Inside the folder were phone records, Melissa's cell phone, obtained through legal channels Robert wouldn't elaborate on. Highlighted in yellow were several calls over the past 3 months. To Planned Parenthood, to a women's health clinic in Denver, to an abortion provider. The most recent call was dated 3 weeks ago, when Melissa would have been about 3 weeks pregnant based on her lab report. "She called an abortion clinic?" I whispered. "She called. We don't know if she went. But look at this." Robert pulled out another document. This is a screenshot from her text messages with her friend Jessica. Again, obtained legally through... well, that's not important. The texts made my blood run cold. Melissa: "Positive test. What do we do?" Jessica: "Do you want to keep it?" Melissa: "I don't know. Brian's freaking out about money. Says we can't afford a baby and rent." Jessica: "So what are you thinking?" Melissa: "Maybe this is the push we need. If I'm pregnant, Evelyn will have to see we need the house." Jessica: "That's kind of manipulative." Melissa: "It's strategic. She's sitting in a $1 million house alone. We're her family. The baby is her grandchild. She'll want us to have it." Jessica: "And if she doesn't?" Melissa: "Then we have other options. But I think she will." I read the texts 3 times, trying to process what I was seeing. "She got pregnant on purpose," I said slowly, "to manipulate me." "We can't know that for certain," Robert said carefully. "The pregnancy might have been unplanned, and she's just using the situation to her advantage. But either way, she's clearly viewing this baby as leverage. She considered abortion. She made calls, that's all we know for sure. Evelyn, I'm not showing you this to hurt you. I'm showing you so you understand what you're up against. This isn't just about a young couple wanting more space. This is calculated." I thought about Melissa's hand on her stomach, the maternal glow I'd thought I saw. Had any of it been real? "What do I do?" "That depends on what you want. You could confront them now, tell them you know what they're planning. You could give them the house." "No!" The word came out fierce and final. Robert nodded. "Then we continue documenting. We wait. And when the time is right, we act. But Evelyn, you need to be prepared for the fallout. When you deny them what they think they're entitled to, this could get very ugly." "It's already ugly," I said, looking at the texts again. "I just didn't want to see it." Over the next 2 weeks, Melissa launched what I can only describe as a charm offensive mixed with psychological warfare. She started every morning by asking if I'd slept well, commenting on how this big house must be exhausting to maintain at night, all those rooms to worry about. She'd show me Pinterest boards of nursery designs, pointing out which rooms would work best. The room next to the master would be perfect, close enough to hear the baby, but you won't be disturbed by midnight feedings in a condo. She brought home brochures for senior communities, leaving them casually on the kitchen counter. "Just some options to think about, Evelyn. No pressure." Brian was softer but no less persistent. "Mom, have you thought about what we discussed? Have you looked at any of those communities Melissa found? We could tour some places this weekend if you want company." Every conversation circled back to the same point. I should move, they should stay, everyone would be happier. I recorded it all. Every suggestion, every innocent comment, every piece of pressure wrapped in concern. My favorite came during a dinner when Melissa's mother Patricia was visiting. "Evelyn, you're so lucky to have a son like Brian," Patricia said, cutting into her chicken. "My daughter married well. He'll take such good care of this family." "He will," I agreed neutrally. "And it's wonderful that you're being so flexible about their needs. Not every mother-in-law would be willing to make sacrifices for the next generation." Sacrifices, as if giving up my home was equivalent to babysitting on a Saturday. "I haven't decided anything yet," I said. Patricia's smile tightened. "Of course not. But surely you can see that a young family needs space more than..." She gestured vaguely. "Well, more than someone at your stage of life." My stage of life. I was 63, not 93. My stage of life includes living in the home my husband built, I said quietly. The home where I raised my son. That's so sentimental, Patricia cooed. But sometimes we have to let go of sentiment and think practically. What would Thomas want? That crossed a line. I stood up, excused myself, and went to my room, but not before I heard Patricia whisper to Melissa, "She's being stubborn. You might need to push harder." "I know, Mom. We're working on it." Working on it, like I was a problem to solve. I met with Robert again on a Tuesday morning, bringing my laptop with weeks of recordings and documentation. "This is extensive," he said, scrolling through my files. "Dates, times, exact quotes. Evelyn, you've built a solid record here." "Is it enough?" "Enough for what? To prove they're manipulating you?" "Yes." "To evict them?" "You don't need proof for that. It's your house. But I suspect you're asking if it's enough to justify your decision to yourself." He saw right through me. "I keep thinking about the baby," I admitted. "My grandchild. If I kick them out, will I ever meet this baby? Will Brian forgive me? Those are questions only you can answer. But Evelyn, let me ask you something. If you give them this house, do you really think your relationship with Brian will improve? Or will you have just taught them that manipulation works?" I hadn't thought of it that way. "There's something else," Robert said, pulling out his own folder. "The PI I hired found some additional information about their finances." He showed me bank statements, obtained legally, he assured me, through public records and credit reports they'd authorized when applying for that mortgage pre-approval. Brian and Melissa weren't struggling. They had over $80,000 in savings. Their combined income was $185,000 annually. They'd taken a vacation to Cancun 6 months ago that cost $6,000. "They're not poor," I said, stunned. "Not even close. They could afford a down payment on a modest home right now. They're choosing to pressure you instead because your house is nicer than what they could buy." So this whole thing about needing to save was partially true in that they want to save more. But it's not about necessity. It's about wanting your house specifically. The betrayal hit me in waves. They'd made it sound like they were desperate, like they had no other options. "Show me everything," I said. Robert laid it all out. Credit card statements showing regular purchases at high-end restaurants, Melissa's car, a leased BMW, Brian's new golf club membership. "They're living beyond their means in some ways," Robert explained. "But they have the means. This isn't about survival. It's about wanting a lifestyle they feel entitled to. Using my house to get it." Exactly. We spent the next hour developing a strategy, not to attack, but to protect. "You continue playing along," Robert advised. "You're considering their suggestion. You're looking at options. But you don't commit to anything. And you keep documenting." "For how long?" "Until Thanksgiving. Set that as your deadline. Tell them you'll have an answer by Thanksgiving. That gives you 6 weeks to prepare and gives them enough rope to—" He paused delicately. "To hang themselves," I finished. I was going to say to show their true intentions, but yes, I became an actress in my own home. "I toured Sunset Meadows today," I announced at dinner 3 days later, which was true. I had toured it with my sister Helen, who'd flown in to support me. "And?" Melissa leaned forward eagerly. "It was nice, very clean, lots of activities." "See, I told you." Melissa squeezed Brian's hand. "Did you like any of the floor plans?" "The one-bedroom units are charming," I said, watching her face light up. "Though I'm not sure about the deposit they require." "How much?" Brian asked. $5,000 plus first and last month's rent, and the monthly fees are around $3,200. Melissa's calculator brain was clearly working. "That's less than you're paying in property taxes and utilities here. It would actually save you money." "Would it? Or would it just save them money when they took over my house?" "I'm still thinking," I said. "But yes, it's an option." Over the next weeks, I played the part perfectly. I brought home brochures. I talked about which furniture I'd keep. Not much, fresh start and all. I even let Melissa take me shopping for condo-appropriate decor. all while the recorder in my pocket captured every word. The breakthrough came on a Saturday afternoon. Melissa was hosting her baby shower, at my house, naturally, without asking permission. 30 women crowded into my living room, cooing over tiny clothes and discussing registry items. I played the gracious grandmother-to-be, serving refreshments and accepting congratulations, but I kept my recorder running. During a lull, I heard Melissa talking to a woman I didn't recognize in the kitchen. "Your home is gorgeous," the woman said. "You're so lucky." "Thank you, we are. Brian's grandfather actually built it. Sorry, great-grandfather? I always get confused." Melissa laughed. "Anyway, it's been in the family forever, and now it's finally ours." "You inherited it?" "Not exactly. My mother-in-law lives here too, but she's moving to a retirement community soon. Sunset Meadows. Have you heard of it? It's supposed to be really nice. She's excited about it." Excited? I'd never said I was excited. "So then you'll have the whole house?" "That's the plan. We're already planning renovations. The kitchen needs to be completely gutted. It's so dated. And we want to add a primary suite upstairs. Maybe convert the garage into a home gym." My kitchen. The one Thomas and I had designed together, where he'd proposed over breakfast 23 years into our marriage because I forgot to make it romantic the first time. That kitchen was dated. That kitchen needed to be gutted. "When does your mother-in-law move out?" the woman asked. "Hopefully by January. We told her we'd help with the transition. Make it easier. She doesn't need to worry about selling or anything. We'll handle all of that." Selling. They were planning to sell my house after I left. "That's generous of you." "Well, family takes care of family, right?" I stood in the hallway listening to my daughter-in-law discuss selling the house my husband built, and felt something inside me crystallize into absolute certainty. This had to end. That evening, after the baby shower guests had left and Melissa was organizing her mountain of gifts, I made my announcement. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," I said, both of them turning to me with barely concealed hope. "About moving. About the house." "And?" Brian prompted. "I'll have a final decision for you by Thanksgiving. That gives me 6 weeks to really consider everything, to make sure I'm making the right choice." Melissa's face fell slightly. She'd clearly hoped for an immediate yes, but she recovered quickly. "That's completely reasonable, Evelyn. Take all the time you need. We just want you to be happy." "And comfortable," Brian added. "No pressure, Mom." No pressure, except for the daily comments, the brochures, the pointed remarks about my stage of life. "Thanksgiving," I repeated. "We'll all sit down together, and I'll tell you my decision. Will that work?" They agreed enthusiastically, probably imagining that by then I'd be so worn down, so convinced of their narrative, that I'd hand over the house with gratitude. They had no idea I was already 3 steps ahead. That night, I called Helen. "I'm setting the trap for Thanksgiving," I told her, "but I need you here when I spring it, for moral support." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," my sister said. "Though I still think you should tell them now. Put yourself out of this misery. Robert says the longer they think they're winning, the more they'll reveal their true intentions. I need an airtight case." "For what? You own the house. Just kick them out." "It's not that simple. It's my son, Helen. If I do this wrong, I might lose him forever. I need him to see what Melissa really is, what they've become together." "And if he doesn't see it?" I looked around my bedroom, the wallpaper Thomas and I had chosen, the window seat where I'd read Brian bedtime stories, the closet that still held some of Thomas's flannel shirts because I couldn't bear to give them away. "Then I'll know I did everything I could," I said, "and I'll still have my home." 6 weeks until Thanksgiving. 6 weeks until everything changed. I spent those weeks being the perfect version of what they wanted me to be. Compliant, thoughtful, slowly coming around to their way of thinking. And all the while I documented. I recorded. I photographed. I built my case brick by brick the way Thomas had built this house. And when Thanksgiving came, I'd be ready to bring it all down. The turkey was golden, the table set with my mother's china, and the tension in my dining room could have been cut with a knife. Helen had arrived the night before, much to Melissa's poorly concealed annoyance. "I didn't know we were having company for Thanksgiving," she'd said, her smile tight. "My sister isn't company," I'd replied. "She's family." Now we sat around Thomas's handcrafted table. Me at one end, Brian and Melissa on one side, Helen on the other. The recorder in my pocket was running. Robert Morrison was on standby, his phone number programmed into my speed dial. "This meal is lovely, Evelyn," Melissa said, one hand resting on her visible baby bump. She was 4 months along now, glowing with that maternal radiance that made my heart ache, even as I steeled myself for what was coming. "Your father would have loved this," I said to Brian, watching him carefully. He looked uncomfortable, like he knew something was coming but couldn't identify what. We ate in relative silence, small talk about the food and weather filling the gaps. Finally, over pumpkin pie, Melissa set down her fork. "So, Evelyn," she said, her voice bright with anticipation. "It's Thanksgiving. You said you'd have a decision for us." Every eye turned to me. I took a sip of water, buying one last moment. "I have," I said calmly. "I've thought very carefully about everything you've said. About this house being too big for me. About senior communities being better suited to my needs. About what's best for your growing family." Melissa was practically vibrating with excitement. Brian leaned forward. "And I've decided," I paused, meeting each of their eyes, "that this is my home, and I'm staying." The silence was deafening. "What?" Melissa's fork clattered against her plate. "I'm not moving to Sunset Meadows. I'm not selling you this house. I'm staying right here, in the home my husband built." Brian's face went pale. "Mom, but you said you were considering—" "I said I would think about it. I have. The answer is no." Melissa's face flushed red. "But we've made plans. We've been looking at contractors, picking out finishes for the renovation." "Renovation of what?" I asked quietly. "This isn't your house to renovate." "It will be eventually," Melissa snapped, then seemed to realize what she'd said. "I mean, Brian is your only child, so naturally—" "Naturally nothing," I interrupted. "This house is mine. It will remain mine. What happens to it after I die is my decision, not your assumption." Helen sat back in her chair, a small smile playing at her lips. She'd been waiting for this. Brian found his voice. "Mom, we need this house. The baby will be raised in a home you provide," I said firmly. "Not one you manipulate me into giving you." Melissa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. We've been nothing but patient and kind, and you're being selfish." "Selfish?" I pulled out my phone, opening the folder of recordings. "Should we talk about selfish? Let's start with the conversation you had with your mother in my kitchen 3 months ago. The one where you discussed property values and renovation plans." Her face went white. "Or perhaps the baby shower, where you told a stranger this house was finally ours and that you were planning to gut my kitchen?" "You were spying on me?" Melissa's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "I was documenting conversations in my own home. In Colorado, that's perfectly legal." I looked at Brian. "Did you know your wife has been telling people I'm excited to move? That we've agreed to sell her the house?" "I never said—" Melissa started. "I have recordings, Melissa. Dates, times, witnesses, of every manipulative comment, every pressure tactic, every lie you've told about our arrangement." Brian looked between us, confused and horrified. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I pulled out the deed to the house from the folder beside my chair and placed it on the table. "This house is solely in my name, Brian. It always has been. Your father left everything to me. Not to us, to me. There was never any agreement that you would inherit it. That was an assumption you made." Brian picked up the deed with shaking hands, reading his father's name, then mine. Only mine. "But Dad always said—" "Your father said someday, after I was gone. Not when she moves into assisted living in her 60s. I turned to Melissa. "And certainly not when my manipulative daughter-in-law decides she wants it." "How dare you!" Melissa shouted. "We've been living here, helping you, keeping you company. You've been living here rent-free while planning to take my home, I said, my voice like ice. There's a difference. Helen spoke up for the first time. I think you should know that Evelyn has consulted with an attorney. Everything she's done is legal and documented. Melissa's face cycled through rage, disbelief, and calculation. Finally, she settled on a different tactic. Fine, we'll buy it from you then. $950,000. That's more than fair. It's not for sale. $1 million, she countered desperately. At any price, I finished. This house is not for sale, to you or anyone else. I pulled out 2 envelopes from my folder and placed them in front of Brian and Melissa. What's this? Brian asked, his voice barely a whisper. That is your formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises, I said, my heart breaking even as I maintained my composure. As the sole legal owner of this property, I'm exercising my right to reclaim my home for my exclusive use. Melissa ripped open the envelope, scanning the legal document inside. You can't do this. I'm pregnant. Pregnancy doesn't override property law, I said quietly. You have 30 days to find alternative housing. Mom, please. Brian's voice cracked. Can't we talk about this? Work something out? We can work out a relationship after you've moved out and we've had time and space to process what's happened. But Brian, you need to understand. You and Melissa tried to manipulate me out of my home. You made me feel guilty for wanting to stay in the house your father built. That's not something I can just forget. Melissa stood, her face twisted with fury. You're a bitter, selfish old woman. You're jealous because I have Brian and you have nothing. Melissa, Brian grabbed her arm, but she shook him off. No, she needs to hear this. You're alone, Evelyn. You're going to die alone in this house. And when you do, don't expect us to care. Don't expect to ever meet your grandchild. The words were meant to wound, and they did. But I'd prepared for this. That's your choice to make, Melissa, I said quietly. But it doesn't change the legal reality. You have 30 days. The next 2 weeks were Arctic. Melissa and Brian stopped speaking to me entirely. They'd come home late, leave early, and spend their time in their room with the door locked. On day 12, Adult Protective Services showed up at my door. We received a report of potential elder abuse and possible diminished capacity, the social worker explained. I invited her in, showed her my home, my financial records, my medical reports from my recent physical. I demonstrated clear mental capacity and explained the situation calmly. The claim appears to be unfounded, she concluded, making notes, though I do see evidence of family conflict. Family conflict I'm addressing through legal means, I confirmed. After she left, I called Robert. Melissa's getting desperate. Good, he said. Desperate people make mistakes. Keep documenting. Day 20 arrived. They still hadn't packed. I hired professional movers as witnesses and put the sheriff's department on notice. Robert arrived at my house at 9 a.m. with a notary. Everything by the book, he reminded me. At 10 a.m., I knocked on their bedroom door. We need to talk, all of us, now. They came downstairs slowly. Melissa's face was puffy from crying. Brian looked like he hadn't slept in days. You have 10 days left, I said, and you haven't started packing. We're not leaving, Melissa said flatly. Then the sheriff will remove you on day 31. Is that really what you want? Brian suddenly stood up, his face anguished. She's not pregnant anymore, Mom. The room went completely still. Brian, shut up! Melissa's voice was panicked. No, I'm done. I'm done with the lies. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. She had an abortion. Last week. I felt the air leave my lungs. What? There's no baby, Brian said, his voice breaking. There was. For a while. But God, Mom, I don't even know how to explain this. Melissa's face was a mask of rage and fear. You promised you wouldn't tell her. You were using a baby, our baby, to manipulate my mother, Brian shouted. You scheduled the abortion and didn't tell me until the day before. You said we couldn't afford it, that we needed to focus on getting the house first, that we could have kids later. We couldn't afford it, Melissa screamed. Not without this house, not with rent eating up our savings. You have $80,000 in savings, I said quietly. I've seen your bank statements. Her mouth fell open. You how? I told you. I documented everything, including your finances, which showed you've been lying about your financial situation all along. Brian stared at Melissa like he was seeing her for the first time. $80,000? You told me we only had 20. Because you would have spent it. Melissa turned on him. You would have said we could afford the baby, that we didn't need to wait for the house. There was a baby, Melissa. My child. And you. He couldn't finish. He collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands, sobbing. Melissa tried one last time. She dropped to her knees beside Brian's chair. Baby, please. I did this for us. For our future. Your mom is being unreasonable. She doesn't need this house. We do. Once we have it, we can have as many babies as you want. Stop. Brian's voice was quiet but firm. He stood up, stepping away from her. Just stop. He looked at me with red, swollen eyes. Mom, I don't know how to apologize for this. I don't know how to apologize for letting her... for being part of... His voice broke again. Brian, Melissa reached for him. We're done, he said, not looking at her. We're done, Melissa. I want a divorce. What? No, you can't. I can. I should have months ago. He finally met her eyes. You manipulated my mother. You lied to me about our finances. You terminated our pregnancy without really discussing it with me because it didn't fit your timeline for stealing my mother's house. What part of that sounds like a marriage worth saving? Melissa stood, her face contorting with rage. Fine, leave. Choose her over me. But I'm taking half of everything you own in the divorce. And I'll make sure everyone knows what a pathetic mama's boy you are. Take whatever you want, Brian said tiredly. I'll pay any price to be free of you. She grabbed her purse and keys and stormed out. We heard her car peel out of the driveway. For a long moment, Brian and I just looked at each other across the wreckage of Thanksgiving dinner, still on the table from a week ago. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered. I'm so sorry. The house feels like home again. It took time. Brian moved out the day after Melissa left, giving me space to heal. We started meeting for coffee once a week, slowly rebuilding trust. He went to therapy. Real therapy, not just one session, but committed weekly appointments where he worked through why he'd been so easily manipulated, why he'd chosen Melissa's lies over his mother's well-being. I wanted to believe her, he told me 3 months in, because admitting what she really was meant admitting I'd made a terrible mistake, that I'd hurt you for someone who didn't even love me, just what I could give her. The divorce proceeded quickly. Melissa tried to claim entitlement to the house, but Robert shut that down immediately. It was never marital property. Last month, Brian asked if he could help me with a project. What kind of project? I asked. Renovating the guest house out back. If you'd let me, I'd like to rent it from you, pay actual rent, be your tenant, not your freeloader. We negotiated a fair market rate. He moved in 2 weeks ago. It's not the same as before. We both have boundaries now. But it's healing. It's honest. And this morning, he brought someone to Sunday breakfast. Mom, this is Amy Rodriguez, he said, nervous but hopeful. We met at my therapy group. Amy was warm, funny, and when she complimented my kitchen, she said, Brian told me his dad built this house. That must mean so much to you. It does, I said, looking at my son. He smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen since before Melissa. After they left, I walked through my house, the house Thomas built, the house I fought for. I touched the crown molding he'd carved, the windowsills he'd sanded smooth, the hardwood floors he'd laid one board at a time. Thank you, Thomas, I whispered, for building something worth fighting for, and for teaching our son that some things are worth more than houses, things like integrity and honesty and love that doesn't come with conditions. Outside my window, I saw Brian and Amy laughing in the garden, and I thought about second chances, about redemption, about how sometimes the hardest thing we do for the people we love is refuse to let them use us. This house stands for 100 years, just like Thomas said it would. And when I'm gone, truly gone, not manipulated into leaving, Brian will inherit it. But this time, he'll have earned it.